Hey, good afternoon. If it's afternoon for you, good evening, good morning. If you're watching this from someplace across the world or maybe later. Welcome to weekly live stream Neurofeedback and Chill. I'll be your host, Dr. Andrew Hill. If you haven't met me before, I'm a neuroscientist, co-founder of companies like TrueBrain and Peak Brain. And I have a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, and I teach people how to understand their brains and hopefully take control and understand and be less overwhelmed by how our brains work, maybe. And tonight I'm going to talk about attention. Some folks asked for this topic on the Discord that we hang out on, the Neurofeedback Discord. And that's usually in the link below, though maybe I have to update it, so I'll check after the show. But attention, how is it? Work? What is it? How does it function? And the format of the weekly live stream is I'll do some neurofeedback and describe what I'm doing, help you understand what neurofeedback is, and often do a neurofeedback protocol related to the topic. So attention is great because in general we have really good history, experience, results, data around attention and neurofeedback. So let me turn off the timer and the title. And what's behind me here on the screen, this is something called QEEG, which is neurofeedback software. So let me move myself off to the right. And what I'm going to do is set up a neurofeedback session that will involve measuring my brain. And I'll set up a couple of wires in my head, and I'll put them in places that are involved with executive function. And so that's from what I'll talk about tonight is where on the brain, why we think about executive function, in terms of cortical areas, and then some other areas that maybe we don't think about in a neurofeedback context purely, but in a real information processing, a cognitive neuroscience perspective on executive function or attention, that I hope will give some of the neurofeedback geeks in the audience a little bit of a different perspective, because you've probably been hearing about the arousal model and cortical phenotypes for years, and I'll show you guys a couple of those things, the classic QEEG stuff. But I also want you to understand the nuances, the time course of attention, the laterality of attention. I want you to understand when you're having trouble with managing executive function with your focus or your impulsivity or your sleep, which can be tied to executive function, and I'll explain why. I want you to understand when these things happen with your control over your behavior, what's happening and how maybe to take control. So as we dig in tonight, please ask questions. I watch the live questions as much as I can. I go back to them every few minutes and answer them. So say hello, ask questions as we dig in. Now I'm going to set myself up for a neurofeedback protocol, and this one is going to be a sequence of left and right. It's among the best for executives. So you can see here we have, this is a right-sided protocol followed by a top of the head protocol. So I actually don't want that order. So I'm going to remove this one. This software is called QEEG, and it's sort of the granddaddy of the neurofeedback packages out there. And I've been using it for more than 25 years. It used to have a different name. When I started using it, it ran on DOS, to give you some example of how old it is. And let's do 9-minute segments, which is pretty short. I do abbreviated segments just so I can show you everything, but I would typically do 15-minute segments in a clinical environment or when training myself. This one becomes a setup, and we'll make this one the C4. Let's make it A2, that's fine. And we're going to inhibit or measure my theta brain waves on the right-hand side of the head, right there. That's the right sort of pre- and post-central gyrus cluster. And those gyri are involved with receiving all the information as it comes up from the body, the post-central gyrus, and sending all the descending information, the motor control, if you will, in the precentral gyrus. And that cluster is also, especially the precentral gyrus, it's also the sort of most posterior part of the frontal lobe. And so in a very real way, the pre- and post-central gyri become the sort of mind-body connection. And as I'll explain more in a moment, they handle this really interesting combination of attention and sleep. And so the left and the right have different features, and this is part of what I want to teach you is the laterality of executive function or attention. And after I set myself up here, let me finish configuring the protocol. Then I will, then I'll give you a little tutorial on what I think attention is, basically. Let's see, we're gonna do 4 to 7. Let's do 12 to 15. Let's have fun with going a little faster than I usually go. 22 to 34. Those are my frequencies. And we're going to set up some refresh or auto goals. So every 30 seconds, the software is going to move itself, move the comparisons, the measurement criteria next to where my brain is. And then when my brain spends 30 seconds trending or staying in the right direction, the software is going to let the game run. It's sort of as simple as it gets. That's how neurofeedback works. Now you know a lot. So if you understood that, again, what we're doing is measuring the brain as it changes on its own moment to moment. So for instance, the left side protocol I'm setting up here under C3. C3 and C4 are very heavily involved with executive function. And what I'm doing is setting up an inhibit or a measurement criteria around theta. Theta is an automatic mode. It's sort of the brain putting halfway into rest mode, and it's able to react to input, but it's harder to control, called theta, 4 to 7 hertz. I'm going to change the right and make it have a faster beta at, we're going to do 14.75, I think, to 17.75. So that's just shy of 15 to 18, which is sort of a left-sided phenomena. And you may have heard it just chimed at me and turned pink. That means I mistyped something. So instead of 5, if the math doesn't work, it'll give you a little red line there. Okay, what's going on? Maybe there's a space in there. 17.75. Is it want me out of there? Yes, it is. All right. 24 to 36. So what I've done is set up 3 different frequency bands, and I'll show you on the screen in a minute. But we have a slow, a medium, and a fast in each of these 2 protocols, these setups. And also in both of them, we have these auto goals. There we go. That one wasn't set up either, apparently. And I'm running each of them for 9 minutes. And the first one is going to be at C3 left side, pre and post-central gyrus cluster. And the right is going to be the right pre and post-central gyrus. These little C3 and C4 areas. I tend to put them a little bit forward, so they're really over the precentral gyri a little more thoroughly. I find that creates fewer problems in training and a little bit more positive upside. And I can answer questions about that, what that means, if you guys are curious. But there's a protocol. And so let me go back and look at the stream questions and see how you guys are. Let's see. The volume is low? Okay. What can I do about the volume? It looks like it's all the way up here. Let's move the microphone closer. Thank you for letting me know. Volume is low. How about now? If I speak loud, can you guys hear me? Is it better? Hey guys. Hey Raider Ashwood. I see Guy Soleil. I see Leandro De Silva. Hey Leo. Jay Han. Hey Jay. Okay, so some great questions building up. So, hey guys. I'm going to set myself up with a C3A1 and a C4A2 protocol sequentially. Going to use some paste. Going to use a trusty old QEEG and put 3 wires on. So let me answer some questions here. So Radar is asking, are you going to release a software package that covers EEG neurofeedback, or is it just for HEG? So I have a piece of software that's in alpha that right now does HEG because I don't have a good solution for HEG that's easy to use, that's inexpensive, and that works across different platforms and amps. And so I built something most of the way there, and then I kind of backburned it because I have another software package or 2 that has to get finished before that. And those will get finished this calendar year, the other things I'm working on in 2025. Let's see how this ages, this video. But it's a software package that's supposed to be, the one I'm working on now, with some priority. It's set up to really help us manage neurofeedback in a much more elegant way, because any of you who've worked with me know that I collect a lot of subjective information, sleep, focus, how you're feeling day to day. And attention is not one thing, it's several different aspects, as we'll talk about tonight. And I watch how those things change, these regulatory features of the brain, sleep, stress, and attention especially, to figure out what happens when you're training someone's brain. And so what that means is you have to sort of keep a good eye on all those features and almost visualize what's happening with regards to change over time. You know, there's a model you have of someone's brain or an understanding you have about how a system works, and then you train that system and you get an effect. Hey guys, chime in on the chat who are live right now. When you train the brain, just testify for a second. You actually feel it, right? Most of the time you have an experience of the session. And if you do the right session or a good session, it feels kind of good. And if you do the wrong thing or screw something up, it can feel a little bit weird or even bad if it's the wrong protocol for you. So those of you who are live here, feel free to jump in with your own experiences or tell me I'm wrong, which is fine too. Let's see, another ear clip. And so I have this software, this HEG software that's most of the way there, but I have to get the tracking software out first. And the tracking software is going to basically be a fitness tracker for the brain. All you guys can use it. I'll give a bunch of you guys some alpha chits available, CHIT, and we'll create some alpha memberships in the software platform. And the idea is to make a really good graphical, visualized spread of all the healthy habits, the hyperbaric medicine, the red light therapy, the exercise, the meditation, the psychotherapy, and kind of track it all, and the neurofeedback, and track it all against somewhat sophisticated data models like brain mapping, like attention testing, and start to create a coalesced set of data that you can both track and also visualize how it changes, and do the same thing with your goals. Register your goals and visualize those and watch how those change, and start picking up patterns yourself about how behavioral interventions or small changes you're making are making the system you're working with flex. And that's what I do when I do neurofeedback for you. When I choose protocols, help you adjust protocols, I'm like, that beta protocol, their sleep did this. Regulatory kind of change there. All right, that makes some sense. Let's adjust this frequency. But you'll be able to do that with all kinds of things like sleep habits and meditation and, you know, I'm a jerk on Friday when I drink on Thursdays. Interesting. You know, like all kinds of goals can be kind of captured if you're making notes day to day and things start to emerge in a graphical way. So I think what this tool will do is let us do better neurofeedback, and as individuals do better neurofeedback on ourselves, with ourselves, but also own the process more. And a lot of my goal with neurofeedback is to give people the tools, that's through brain mapping and through neurofeedback, through meditation, through education, to pick up the reins and really take some control over the process much more broadly. All right, let me see what I'm setting up here. I have some electrodes going in. My ground wire for the first half is going to be the green socket, which is my right ear. My left socket, black wire, is going to be my reference. And we're doing a C3 protocol to begin, but I only have 2 wires. This could be tragic if I don't have a third wire here. Let's see. I could have sworn here it is. Look at that. Wires have magical properties to travel all over the house. All right, third one's going to the red socket. I'll leave the amp on the table, though. You guys have seen it. Let's see. All right, so third one's C3, and then I'll move it to C4, just for simplicity's sake. And since I'm mostly bald, one trick, I have to actually look at my brain, my head, and then I'm a tiny little person on the screen right now. So let me blow it up for a second while I'm placing a wire. There we go. All right, hello. So the vertex of my head, the midline, is in line pretty much with my nose when I'm looking at the camera. And if you go up from the bone landmarks, which is the auricular notch on either side of the ear, or this landmark right there, the nasion, you go up about an inch and you end up at a sort of reference ring. You have T3 and T4 there. You have FPZ right here. And then you can use the vertex CZ and go halfway in between the reference ring, and you get to most of the sites you might want to use that are a little hard to find. So you can go halfway from CZ over to the left, over to T3, and C3 is about there. And since I'm bald, I'm putting some paste on my head to begin with, because pasted wire to pasted bare skin works a whole lot better than pasting a bit of paste to bare skin by itself, believe it or not. And that it'll hang there. Relatively good C3 placement, if I do say so. This is a better camera for doing that kind of thing. Cool, some great questions building up. So to answer the first question though, yes, once the HEG software is released, which requires releasing the other software, then finishing up the HEG software, which mostly means building the driver layer for the pocket and aerobics devices, because the software otherwise is pretty functional, and it might need a couple of months of rebuilding with some pro developer help, but it's mostly there. That's the first step, is to have a cross-platform piece of software that runs on Mac and PC and Unix maybe, Electron-based or Tauri-based, that has pretty good performance and sufficient sort of in the code-based signal processing to handle things like HEG, which do a slow time course, and therefore slow signal processing is fine. When it comes to EEG and to true games and to true interesting things in the screen, then I think we need to use things where we're creating local modules that can take advantage of the video card, the CPU processing, and these platforms that I'm building the software in should be able to decouple down to different libraries at the local machine level for the signal processing. And I'll test some of that. It'll probably be up to a year before that's out at this point. But the HEG will get out first, and then we'll see who uses it, who likes it, and I'll keep it relatively inexpensive. And then I'll have an upgrade path for you to get the EEG version when and if that one comes out several months later. So you're probably talking about a year, all things considered, potentially, radar for that particular software package. Hey Leo, thanks for the kudos. Wish we had a wireless system. They exist. I mean, the Pocket and Aerobics for a long time, especially before they were called, back when they were really focusing on the A3, the Peanut, other, the A1. Those all had Bluetooth wireless versions, and you could even get Bluetooth wireless modules for some of the Wiz line that would get it to communicate via Bluetooth. And Bruce hacked, I think, the Bluetooth spec a fair amount to work on issues of latency and synchronization, and it worked okay. But whenever I used it in environments, it got really flaky with other stuff in the environment. So I stopped using wireless ones a long time ago. And then you have the Neurobit Optimas, which are great amps. There's a Bluetooth version of those as well. And a couple of our clients have purchased and used their own Bluetooth versions, and they seem to work fine. But I trust the USB version a lot better. For QEEG, we have a wireless version. We use the CGX Cognionics little device, and it collects the data locally and then streams out to a PC if you want. There's several devices like that for full head cap data acquisition. So let's see. Other questions. When would you do C3 then C4 versus C3 and C4 as two-channel training? Asks Jay Han. Hello, Sonia. Hi, nice to see you. So Jay, that's a nice question. I'm doing some C3 right now, and then I'm doing some C4. I have a great, I think it's great. I hope it's great. Let me know. I have a video on sequences versus combined training. I forget what it's called. It's a few weeks ago. That probably digs into why you choose and how you sequence. And you think about foundational modes and failure modes and building on the laterality model versus the arousal model. So I'll get into that a tiny bit tonight. But if you want to dig into much more deeply why we do some of these like sequenced versus two-channel, I have an earlier video on sequences that I encourage you to watch from a month ago or something. But in general, C3 and C4, these pre and post-central gyri, have different features, different functions. And when looking at a QEEG and a performance test, you can see these things. And let me make myself small and then start my session, explain my session, and then keep talking about, about neurofeedback and attention. Oops, come on. So this is like not the right way to do this, manually move everything around as I'm talking to you guys, but flying by the seat of my pants. So let me just start the session. I don't know if Eager, the software, is going to be hooked up to the amplifier right now. Let's see if it finds the amp, because I had the amp unplugged until a moment ago. Let's use Super Chill Formation, which is a puzzle grid. Okay, we got some signals initializing there at the top. Give it a couple seconds. Let me cover that little annoying error message. There we go. So decent signals on the first try. Those of you who train can, again, back me up that sometimes you don't get good signals in the first try and you have to kind of fiddle with the 3 or 4 wires and figure out whether they're not working. I do have, 100 plus clients usually at once training at home this way who manage it. And we do live sessions if you want to learn how to do this. And we teach you how from anywhere in the world. And then we support you after the first couple of weeks of guided instruction, doing it live whenever you need with coaches all around the world. So plug for Peak Brain. If you want brain mapping, we have a fall special running in all of our physical offices in the US for $250 US dollars, or similar prices are available at the European, the London office, the other locations we have. So if you want a cheap brain map, come on into our offices. Otherwise, you can do full remote, a little more expensive, but we do fully remote neurofeedback and brain mapping. So we would teach you to do this stuff. And what I'm doing again is measuring left side beta waves. And you can see below me it reads 4 to 7, which is theta. All the way on the right there, it says 22.9. I always do this at the end of the day when I'm tired, coffee's worn off a little bit, and people call me out on having high theta. They're like, whoa, your theta is really high. Yeah, can't you tell based on how I talk? Come on. But the theta is very strong, a couple, 20 plus microvolts. And what I want to do is make it lower. I want to train it down. I want my brain to reduce it. So I can do it a bit voluntarily by concentrating, because the active concentration reduces theta. So watch that 25.3 number, the average. I'll just concentrate. And now it's 22, 21, 20, 19. Now I relax, I'll go back up. But here's a couple, that's kind of a party trick, because I'm not controlling my theta. I'm just concentrating, and I know theta falls when you concentrate strongly. So anyways, you can see that my theta goes up and down. What I want to do, let me change the scaling. So part of why theta is so high is that the signal is really not stable. I'm moving around a lot. So here's a couple ways to fix this if you're an eager user. So first of all, highlight the top screen, the top trace. And you can see that my raw trace is actually moving. That's mostly movement. As I move around, you're getting some extra movement. And that makes the whole trace sway and jump at this scale of 20 microvolts. That's the height of the scale on this raw, especially when I'm talking and moving the wires. So one thing you can do in eager is you can scale up a little bit, scale to 50 microvolts, which will shrink things, but it will also apply a slightly more aggressive high pass filter to the visual scale. So instead of high passing at like 0.1, it high passes at 1 or something. And so it pulls it down a little bit and keeps it still. Also, the excursions are big, so I don't need the scale to be this low to see the excursions. I can scale up a little bit and I'll still see the big noise. Let's do that. So F9. Now my SC box got highlighted, so I hit plus. Now it goes to 50 microvolts in my scale, and you can see that the height of the traces got smaller. I'm now working with a 50 microvolt instead of a 20 microvolt scale. I'm gonna hit enter, which moves my focus from the scale to the threshold box. And I like to set my threshold with my eyes open for eyes open protocols at about twice the average, the AVG there. And that's close enough. I'm gonna hit enter again to deselect the raw trace. And now I'm gonna hit F9 and F11 back and forth a couple times. And what that's gonna do is auto scale and auto threshold the bands below. And now you can see that my theta is about the same at 21 microvolts, but my threshold, my THR, is now at 29 microvolts. And the reason is that THR number tracks the little lines. Oops, some movement. The little THR number tracks the lines outside of the trace. So I'm training down theta. My theta dips a little bit or stays low. It'll be within the lines, and that will let the game run, basically. And then when my beta waves, the 14.75, it's the opposite. I'm making 8.5 microvolts. I want more. I've set a threshold just below it, 6.5. And so now whenever my beta brainwaves surge or stay large outside of beta, here, I'll just start it off. So function F5 to begin. Oh, way too loud. All right. You guys can hear those beeps, I'm guessing. So those beeps are also accompanied by a vertical line in the top raw trace, meaning all 3 bands are being passed. And right now I'm training with auditory only, which we know from some recent research is actually a little bit stronger than visual only, which surprised me a little bit, but not a lot. I did some research of my own on looking at the evoked potential of neurofeedback, and the auditory aspects of it are very strong. So let me actually show you what's happening here. You can see a bunch of squiggles, but when all 3 are in range, I'm working on one monitor here, so let me show you the other visualization. So what's happening, it's kind of silly, kind of basic, and I could set it up so it was more random or the pictures more interesting. This is called Formation, this game. This is actually among the most popular games that we have in the offices. It's very basic, and even when I forget to turn on the randomization, people really like this game. It feels very satisfying. I also think for this game, you can use it strategically in 2 different ways. One is you can use things that somebody's interested in. Like if you give an autistic kid who's only interested in Pokemon, galleries of Pokemon, guess what? He's sitting there glued to the thing. And it's really easy to get some compliant behavior. But you can also use it, you know, in some desensitization, some trauma, some OCD, some phobia stuff. So I've had some psychotherapists use this software called QEEG, unveiling some of the features, the visual stimuli while training for anxiety support. And so triggering a little bit of intense while rewarding the reduction in that intensity in the brain, and creating a really rapid shift sometimes in learning and in healing. So it can be used very strategically, even though it's a simple game. When I'm training in the office, I encourage us to do random orders, and all of our offices have like 15 or 20 different galleries that are kind of cool. I'm just running the basic one that comes with QEEG. But let's go back to signals for a second because it's cooler. And then let's talk more about attention because you guys have questions. So Jehan is asking, when would you use C3 then C4 versus C3 and C4? So think about C3, left side. This cortical resource is more about the stabilization of attention. If that is needed, I would do it. And that might mean inattentiveness or sleep maintenance are both managed. Left precentral gyrus has a big sleep stabilization phenomena to it. It's not exactly, the literature would suggest vertex phenomena are involved with sleep. I find vertex is involved with the onset of sleep, and we do see that in literature as well. But the left side is more involved with the maintenance of sleep, maintaining vigilance when awake and focus and sustained attention under low intensity is left side features. And those are things that are also involved with stabilization of turning off vigilance and staying asleep. And this is fairly important stuff for the brain to be able to do both modes voluntarily. If you can't do the modes voluntarily, you drift when you're focused and don't stay clear and on unless things are intense, and you don't stay asleep at night. Every little thing pulls you out and you skim the surface, and you get poor maintenance of the architecture. And usually that means you don't make much deep sleep, and the consequence of that is slowing down the speed of processing. So the alpha waves will slow down in speed on a brain map as well. And these are all, the speed of processing is how rapidly you can load things in and out of your mind. So how rapidly you can load your working memory system in is part of the attention management. And then the left side stabilizes the tone of that attention, keeps the spotlight on the thing, holds your attention on your attention, essentially. And then the right precentral gyrus, C4, is involved with supervisory tone. It sits in the passenger seat and reads the map and says, hey, we're going to turn up ahead, adjust your behavior, and lets you kind of shape what you're doing to match what you know you want to do. So it has this supervisory role. It also connects some visual tissue with some frontal appraisal tissue as well. So some judgment about things are involved, but it's very much a coordinator or supervisor. So the big pre and post central gyri, and the left is also involved with the depth of sleep. The vertex, CZ, is involved with softening the body tone, but also bursts of SMR there we call, well, sleep spindles. So if you're asleep and a dog barks, you'll have a K complex, a little knock wave, and then a burst of SMR as you stay asleep. SMR's inhibitory tone, 12 to 15 hertz, is inhibitory tone. So bursts of 12 to 15 hertz beta act like this sort of alpha, this quiescent beta on the motor strip to inhibit, gently pump the brakes and let you hold things together. This is sort of why we discovered that SMR was the core frequency to help support reduction in seizure. I have a live stream on SMR. It's really the core of modern neurofeedback in a bunch of ways. So I encourage you to watch that and learn more about sensory motor rhythm, also called sigma or sleep spindles. So very heavily involved with the architecture of sleep, this tissue up here. And again, stabilization and supervision of executive. Now we also have for attention systems cortically. We have areas involved frontally. So we have an approach system on the left, which is a kid in the porch going, hey, that's cool. And there's a void system on the right who goes, it's going to suck too hard. Leave me alone. And those are supposed to be balanced by your anterior cingulate. Now the cingulates, front and back, are super important, but they're at the intersection of attention and stress. So the left and right, the central areas are attention and sleep. And the front to back are attention and anxiety or attention and stress. Now, front and back are built very different. Left and right are a little different than each other, but front and back are very, very different than each other. The cingulates do have somewhat similar features and roles, but because the tissue in the brain is so different, they end up acting very differently. So what I'm really getting into is that in cortical organization, the front of the brain, and as you go more frontal, this is more true, the front of the brain is the inside self. It's how we feel about things. It's the thoughts we're having. It's holding value in our mind. It's the cognitive appraisal. So the anterior cingulate's job is to reconcile the approach versus the avoid in some ways and hold a moment of value and thought in our minds. And the posterior cingulate, as you move to the back of the brain, you become more outside world. And so all the way in the back of the occipital lobe is when you end up with the screen on which you paint visual information. But before you get there, you end up with sensory and association and social and language and other areas that are about the outside world largely. And so you have these kind of feature sets here in the central areas or coordinating them, but the front to back become these sort of swinging the lens around of attention in some ways. Not the stabilization, but the meaning, the salience, the import. And the one in the front, the anterior cingulate, when it gets super stuck, we end up with things called obsessiveness or perseveration. And if it's beta waves, it's OCD type features. If it's theta waves, being excessive, too much automatic mode, too much lubrication. Now it's songs stuck in your head and biting your nails and having tics. And so the one in the back, if it gets stuck, we end up with rumination or fearfulness and the attention being pulled by things that we're fearful for or we're easily alerted to. And that's when we direct our attention resources to the environment, alerting or orienting. Those are environmental momentary engagement phenomena. So I've been talking about the cortical resources, the stabilizer, the supervisor, the approach, the avoid, the project manager in the anterior cingulate, the lifeguard in the posterior cingulate. We also have some sensory and social and language tissue. On the right, it's the princess and the P, the right tempo parietal cluster, bringing all the information there. And the left, it's a lot more receptive language. And above those areas, we integrate some of that stuff in association cortices. So really complicated kind of assembling the world for us in some ways, and then how we feel about it and act on it, and then the coordination. So that's the cortical organization. But then in terms of practical use, there's an actual attention system. I'm paused. Let me switch over to halfway. There's an actual attention system in the brain, in each hemisphere of the brain, that is completely separable. I got my PhD in a laterality lab at UCLA with Dr. Aran Zaidel, and we did an awful lot of what's called tectistoscopic testing of flashing things in one visual field or the other, and you can measure attention systems, completely separate attention systems, and management of same in each hemisphere separately. So it's pretty wild. Okay, I changed my session to 12 to 15 hertz instead of, lost my electrode, but it's plugged in on one side. There we go. So that's noise on the screen because electrode is not touching anything. Let me clean that off a little bit and go back and look at my larger. Okay. So I forgot what I was on about. But we have these we have these cortical resources, and then we also have the engagement of very rapid resources. Some of them are automatic. They are a little bit amenable to effort and cognition, but they're a little bit more basic. And they're also a coordination of those cortical resources as well. So they're not quite reflexive, but they are sort of a use. Is that too far medial? Hey, neurofeedback guys on the channel, what do you think? Am I too far medial? Should I move it a little over? I can't see. I always move my C4 a little too medial, so I'm going to say it's a little too medial. It's the shape of my egg head. That's what's going on there. All right, here we go. Stable signal. Do we have a winner? I think we do. We do. All right, but you see what's happening in my raw signal as it cleans up from the noise? It's actually hard to see my signal. The scale we set before makes it hidden, so we have to fix it. We'll go back. All right. So now I've selected the signal. I'm going to F9 it again. Oops. Function F9. Change the scale back down to 20. Scale's fine. Sorry, the threshold is fine now. Now I'm going to hit F11 again. That's good. F5 to begin. Cool. All right. So we're back off to the races now. And I am training my brain, but on the other side, right-hand side, measuring theta, measuring SMR beta, 12 to 15. Rewarding that. So when that goes up, I get rewards. When my high frequency betas, when my thetas go down, I get rewards. So slightly different. So you guys all know about executive and ADD versus ADHD and all that kind of stuff. And I'll show you some brain maps in a second. But if you've done neurofeedback, if you work in neurofeedback, if you've had neurofeedback or a brain map yourself, you may have some concept of this. What you may not have much concept of is that there's a management of information, a processing of information that's very, very rapid. And when doing this lateralized attention testing, this dystoscopic testing, which you can do in people that are both typical brains and in people that have split brain surgeries for epilepsy reasons, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, there was a lot of these surgeries going on. And part of my work as a grad student was traveling around the US doing EEGs and attention testing, hemispheric attention testing on people who had been the first big round of patients that Bogan and Sperry did their split brain research on. And my advisor, Ron Zeidel, he was a grad student, I think at Caltech, and ended up working underneath these gentlemen and doing this sort of tech work around information processing that led to his ideas about lateralized networks of attention. And all of that stuff, the lateralized networks of attention, are sort of like automatic resources coming online, and they correlate with different ERPs, event-related potentials or evoked potentials. This EEG here is ongoing or endogenous EEG, the changing amount of bands, the network connectivity, whatever we're training. But when you think of networks of attention in a cognitive neuroscience perspective, the control over the attention, well, I mean, that's really what executive function is, or attention is. It's not focus, it's control over focus. If your focus is captured by a song or by nail biting or by worrying about some rejection or some tone of voice you heard, it's not really effective focus. If you can control the lens of your attention, I would argue that's the place you want to be, and that's executive, part of executive function. Loading things quickly and smoothly into your mind is speed of processing. Holding them in your mind without effort is the ability to have low theta, so more information doesn't kick out the information in your working memory. The ability to reconcile the approach versus the avoid is also anterior cingulate. The lift of the stable and the pullback of the supervisor, those are also right behind the anteriors in the front, the approach versus the avoid. So it kind of makes some sense. So these have to be coordinated in the moment to do a few things. And let me give you 3 different labels of executive function happening in a very early time course in the first few hundred milliseconds. There's something called alerting, which is your attention kind of coming up like a spotlight, the spotlight engaging with the outside world. There's also something called orienting, which is swinging your attention in space to the thing you know you might want to look at. And then there is conflict resolution or executive conflict. And that's when you start to get one signal from the environment and you have to suddenly change or stop what you're doing, inhibit what you're doing, and reconcile different information and then keep acting. A real world example of that is getting a walk signal starting to step out into the street. At the same time, you hear a car screeching around the corner. We have to decide that you're getting conflicting information. Now, I helped work on something called the lateralized attention network task. You can look at my PhD work or many of Dr. Zeidel's published papers, where the task is we have arrows flashing up on either side, left and right on the visual screen, and you're looking at a crosshair in the middle, staring at it, so it flashes very briefly. And it's an arrow pointing up or down, and so you're holding a mouse sideways and tapping an up or down button with either hand. You block the hands. And above and below the target arrow are 2 more arrows. And the last detail is that for some trials, you might flash an asterisk on the screen, and you might flash it where the stimulus is going to show up. You might not flash it, or you might flash it on the other visual field. So with all the different combinations, what you end up being able to do is to test executive conflict. You know, are you better at responding to the middle arrow compared to the flankers? This is a modification of the Posner flanker task, which was horizontal single row, but had some laterality effects in the visual field. So Dr. Zeidel took it and made 2 of them with crosshair fixation in the middle, and you end up with this laterality, this ability to do the Posner flanker test in each hemisphere separately. So you report the direction of the arrow up or down, and if the flankers, the arrows that are on either side, are also pointing up and the middle arrow's up, you're faster and you're better, you're more accurate and faster. And if there's a conflict, if the arrows are pointing down and the middle arrow is pointing up, it slows you down and you're a tiny bit less accurate. So that's executive conflict in terms of the Posner flanker task or Ron Zeidel's lateralized attention network task. I think Posner called it the ANT, A-N-T, attention network task. So with this test, you also have what's called orienting. Turns out you're faster and more accurate if you first flash an asterisk on the screen a few milliseconds before you flash the stimulus. It improves your ability to prepare your attention, swing the spotlight into gear, and trials that are properly oriented with a stimulus that pops up before are better. They have a different phenomena. They're smoother, they're faster, they're less error prone. But now you can actually think about the benefit of orienting versus not orienting. So if it flashes in the middle versus left, or not at all versus left, those are examples of the benefit of orienting versus nothing. And they act slightly differently to orient someone with no spatial cue versus give them the spatial cue. It's a tiny bit different, and there's different reasons why you might want to use different variants of the LANT. But you can also do something where you orient them invalidly. You flash the orienting spatial cue to the wrong visual field, meaning different hemisphere, and then you flash the target in the other side. And that's the cost of spatial orienting. So orienting benefit, orienting cost are ideas that Dr. Zeidel developed in terms of how well your attention can be facilitated by the environment when you direct your executive function, or how much it can sort of be thrown off. And different individuals will have different ability to benefit from orienting benefit and to feel the cost of orienting cost. For instance, impulsivity makes you more likely to have high orienting cost. High theta means higher orienting cost. And then you have, let's see, conflict, orienting, and alerting. I guess those are the 3. The trick, though, is that you can do the blocked trials in one hand or the other, and you have trials in different visual fields. And you may know that each eye, each has 2 visual fields, and it has the retina going to the other sides. So right behind the eyes, you have the optic chiasm, where the retinas are sorted from having both visual fields into having an optic nerve and optic tracts that sort out into one visual field. And that goes to the opposite hemisphere. So left hemisphere will have the right visual field and vice versa. And so as that happens, you only experience the information in one visual field on one side of your brain. And if you have the hand controlled by that side of the brain do the responses, you restrict the entire information flow to one hemisphere, and you get a testing, a measurement of one hemisphere. And that's true even of people with an intact corpus callosum. Their scores are the same, basically, as people that don't have an intact bridge between the hemispheres. And so, contrario-wise, if you use the the other hemisphere, and you force the information through the corpus callosum, through the visual tissue differently, then you can see a much slower phenomena. And now typical people can do that, and people that have split brain phenomena don't do very well at all. They really perform quite poorly when forced to try to put information through tracks that don't exist, or they exist partially. So this is the lateralized attention network task. But the idea here is that these are all operating in a very rapid, a very short time course. And you can figure out from phenomena in behavior, essentially, in performance, what's happening with executive function. So this is just to give you a little bit more of a taste of how some of these things work. I'm just going to clean up my electrodes and hang them back off some guitars. All the hobbies in one place. And if you look at my PhD work or some other work I published with Dr. Zeidel on attention, you can see that the aspects of the LANT have individual ERP components. You may have heard of the P300. You can see, for instance, when you correctly orient versus improperly orient someone's attention, a conflict phenomena. You can see the error-related negativity creep in. When you give somebody an alerting cue, you can see the preparatory contingent negative variance. When you do something similar but with language, Dr. Leo Fernandino did some work in the same lab where you provide executive conflict through language, like throw a random grammar error into a sentence. You have to judge if it's real or not. And when the person sees the grammar error, they get like an N400. And there are some N400 components in an orienting cost paradigm for ERPs as well. But the point being, as neurofeedback people, we often don't think of ourselves necessarily as scientists the same way we might want to, because the actual processes of attention don't start at a couple of seconds when you start measuring theta or measuring delta or measuring alpha. They actually start really, really quickly. I mean, one of the reasons I use an executive function test, or the attention test we use, the IVA2, is because attention is a phenomena that you're aware of at around the, maybe 90 to 100 milliseconds, and the resolution is somewhere under 50 milliseconds, 50, for the individual. So you can measure things like raw reaction time, input, output, and get a sense of the outliers and get a sense of, okay, there it is. And a big change of 50 or 100 milliseconds in that phenomena is something we know is perceptible. So let me spend just a quick moment answering questions and maybe show you some examples in the brain of some of these bigger features here. I'm going to scroll back up. I've been ranting. Thanks, guys, for your questions. Really appreciate it. Raider Ashwood, does FPO2 training hit FPZ? It does not, is the short answer. It depends where you are with your reference, right? But if you're FPO2 minus A2 or FPO2 minus T4, you're probably not going to have really any impact on FPZ, just because the circuitry doesn't run across the midline that way. And if you're anchoring to the right ear, you're mostly going to pick up right-sided phenomena with that particular circuit. You might get some interesting things. You might get some subcortical or cortical-like insula features with an FP2 or FPO2, but you're not going to really hit FPZ that much. With FP2, you might a little bit incidentally, but probably not a huge amount. Radar trained PZA 1, 7 to 10 up the other day. Felt good. Kind of made me feel like I had a bit to drink. Yeah, you probably got a little speed boost. That happens sometimes. I see it a lot in kids. They get like a little bit silly after some PZ. So that's usually a sign your PZ training is a tiny bit fast for you. Sonia saying, is it possible to train CZ minus T5? Okay, CZ minus T5, CZ T5 for 15 minutes, and then train CZ T6 for an additional 15 minutes on the same day? It's a great question. I think it depends on the protocol you're doing, Sonia. I can see there's protocols for which that might make sense, but honestly, if you're going after those sites and you have reasons to train, I would often prefer to do interhemispheric referencing versus vertex referencing. And so I assume that you want to work on CZ for some reason. Therefore, T5 minus T6 and CZ minus A1 might be a whole lot safer to segment and sequence than doubling up on CZ, which is a really easy way to create side effects, is to do the same protocol back to back, or even within a few hours sometimes, in the same construction or montage. It can really cause a lot of overtraining effects. We want to avoid that if we can. So El Chad, isolated hemispheric mapping. I did some intentional mapping. Yep. What's noted is, again, this is sort of how I have my constructs, my ideas about the left being a stabilizer and the right being a supervisor. I would say that those ideas have been borne out by lots of cognitive neuroscience in the past 20 years, but I really developed my ideas on that by taking the arousal model from the neurofeedback landscape and the phenotype model from the neurofeedback landscape and tying it into the laterality model that I picked up in the Zidell lab, because it fit pretty well. And I also came in with a developmental background, a lot of autism and other developmental constraints, where you see, the sort of, it's not true, but the old phrase, ontology recapitulates phonology, phenotypes the idea that during development we go through several evolutionary stages. What is that phrase? We all learned it in 5th grade or something. But the idea is that we develop a little bit in utero like evolutionary stages, fins and tails and things like that. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, I think. That's the one. It was drummed into me so many times. Just it's gonna come up. It's not exactly the same thing, but you will see features in the brain that will develop in a developmental population over time, and you'll see developmental stages and specific developmental deficits in a developmental neuroscience population like kids with autism and severe ADHD and epilepsy and things. You'll see different things about how the brain works because you're seeing different developmental trajectories being stopped or being pushed in different directions. So you can kind of learn a lot about how the brain works by watching the edge cases in some ways. So working with a lot of suffering teaches you a lot about brains, unfortunately. Jehan, do you check impedance or do you rely more on the appearance of the raw wave? For eager, for training neurofeedback, impedance is less important. For training, for doing QEEGs, for doing assessments, impedance is very important. So yeah, we would do impedance checks when doing a full head map and get the impedances looking good. But then for training, we're not training 50 and 60 hertz and above. So if you have a visually clean signal, then you're not getting any real issues generally that matter. So no is a short answer. Also in this amplifier, these whiz amplifiers, less important because they're hard to get now, but the if the impedance goes high, the whiz will turn yellow. So you can actually have a visual check, and you can do it in BioExplorer too. You can program BioExplorer's indicators to show you impedance off the whiz amps in real time. So yes, I mean, I'll notice when it goes bad and I'll push the wire back on, but as long as your signals are fine, you're good in actual training contexts. El Chatterino, so could vision issues, if bad enough, cause issues with all of that? It could. I'll show you a slide in a second. Jehan also got it. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Wow, that was buried deep, right? It was reiterated again and again and again in like 5th grade and 6th grade and whatever else. And then like 20 years ago, they're like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't exactly work that way. It's a good idea. It looks like it might have worked that way, but now we know how it works and it's not quite that way. So, yeah, how we develop as a fetus recapitulates how we evolved as a creature. Yeah, which is a great idea, but there's some big flaws in it. So let me show you a couple things. I want to show you some examples, just some basic ones. So here is, this is ADHD. This is classic ADHD. And I brought this one up for a couple of reasons. One, you can see that we have lots of theta. So that red blob there at the top is theta brainwaves. And theta, again, is a more disinhibited or automatic mode. And so this person would generally have lots of impulsivity with this theta stuff happening. It's just really excessive. And if you haven't ever seen a brain map before, it's kind of hard to see. There's a color bar here under the heads. This is a bell curve, population age matched comparisons. And what we have in the bar graphs is the IVA2 attention test, a CPT, a go, no go. And the left side, that's these purple and blue and red bars, is the go condition, clicking the mouse when the 1 is spoken or popped up on the screen. And the right-hand side is the no-go condition, pumping the brakes when the 2 is spoken or popped up on the screen. And it pops up really easily to see, very slow, 1, 1, again and again, 2, for 15 minutes or so. But people space out, which is inattentiveness, the left side, and people get automatic and reactive or impulsive, and that's the right-hand side. And so the average score on this thing is 100 points, plus or minus 15. And you can just see, even without zooming in, you can see these big gaps out of the bars. That's a lot of executive function difficulty. The gas and the brakes are both kind of sloppy. And that correlates with the theta and the alpha, where theta is disinhibition and the alpha is inattentiveness or the drift. So we would expect the alpha to be driving the light blue bar called vigilance, or changing gears when things shift, and the focus, or sustaining the attention when things are non-dynamic and boring. The alpha might drive that difficulty a bit more. And the theta is driving the orange bar called prudence, how careful you can be, a squirrel, or how automatic. And you can see the before and afters here. We have a pretty big shift in both the thetas and the alphas, but we also have a shift in the delta, the left column. And that's the sort of deep sleepiness this person was carrying around, because without good SMR tone, you end up making tons of theta and not sleeping very deeply. So sleep issues often look like ADHD and vice versa, but this is pretty classic ADHD mixed with sleep issues a little bit. And then you can see at the bottom, this person did about 2 months in neurofeedback, had a decent response, and they brought up their stuff up pretty well. Big changes in the brain, moderate changes in the executive function, but another month or 2 would have closed the loop for this person. They were kind of hard to get into the office. They try to train light, 20 sessions in 2 months, 10 sessions a month is kind of light. I encourage people to do more like 3 or 4 times a week. So in 2 months, you can really get done 35 sessions in a home program or 25 sessions in the office. And you did about the bare minimum, which is fine. Got some good effects, and I think they lasted even at this light amount. But this is what you see most of the time when you see a classic ADHD. Again, theta is more impulsivity. You can think about the left and right side of the attention test. The left is the gas, the right is the brakes. To go along with the brain, where left and right are the supervisor and the stabilizer, the gas and the brakes. So if you're looking at an IVA and a brain map, they really do line up pretty nicely. So let me show you another example. I changed the orientation for some reason, sorry. Now the IVA, the attention test, is at the bottom. Still pretty obvious, pretty big changes. I think it's El Chad who asked about visual system. And you can see here the back of the head, the theta's there. This is impulsivity. And that goes along with the orange bar, the prudence being very low, very impulsive. But it's also really visual. It's the back of the head. The beta also has this blue-ish stuff in the back of the head, low power beta. And that's partially why we're getting worse scores on the visual side. If you look carefully, each side is also then divided into auditory and visual. The visual is very low there, not great there, and you can see big changes in both of them after a while, but the visual system still shows the deeper pinches even after training, and it still shows more theta in the primary visual cortex all the way in the back of the head. So sometimes you'll see the stabilizer and the supervisor driving the ADHD or the executive function difficulty, but you'll often see, especially when the eyes are open, a blob of delta or a blob of theta or alpha, so rest mode, lubrication in automatic mode, or inertia, neutral mode. You'll see that sticking out in one or both sides of the primary visual cortices, O1 and O2 in the back of the head. So again, you can see a bunch of change here. This person had about 25 or 30 sessions, I think, across these maps. You can see this person had a lot more deficit in the executive function testing, even though the blobs of color aren't quite as intense. They're pretty intense. This person also had a lot of anxiety. So the back midline, the posterior cingulate, is really, really lit up in theta. So it's really hard for the lifeguard not to look around. And if you look carefully, there's also a lot of beta on the front midline, and that's the anterior cingulate also being strong. And so this person had a lot of fearfulness, a lot of obsessive fearfulness. The joke is that the lifeguard in the back has learned that things aren't safe and is now looking for sharks in the indoor pool. And so this is kind of like a scattered, distractible, not that focused, but also not that relaxed state. So it's not inattentive, it's burnt out and brittle and reactive and not that fun. And you can see that after a couple months of neurofeedback, this person was able to change their brain. And you could do the same kind of change with psychostimulants. Watch last week's video for some QEEG examples on that. You can do the same kind of thing with meditation. This kind of change would probably take somebody 6 months to a year to pull off. And it takes a little bit of discipline. So it's like a chicken and egg problem with meditating through executive function difficulties. But it does make a difference. If you have some trouble meditating and you want to, you think you should, you kind of know you want to, but you have a lot of attention trouble, one trick is do moving meditation. You know, practice repetitive motion or simple motion like walking while meditating, or yoga with repetitive practice, or weightlifting, meditate during your weightlifting. Like find the motion, put your mind into it, anchor to the attention on purpose, and you're meditating. So find the ways to anchor to the moment and keep going back again and again and again to the anchor, and that's meditation. And that'll build up changes like this as well over a year or more. And not everyone can make this kind of change just by sitting and meditating. But if you did half an hour a day for a year, you might do this kind of change. You can also do this kind of change in a couple of months, maybe 3, typically for neurofeedback. We like to see about 1 color shade, which is 1 standard deviation or z-score. And we like to see about 15 points in the attention test, which is the same amount, every 25 sessions or so of neurofeedback. So you can see in this person and the previous person, it's probably slightly more than that. And what I will say is that these are the most visible changes. Not the first person, but this person did another set of maps. It's a little more green, a little more clean than this one, but the attention performance is very similar. We were not able to crack this visual focus yet by a third set of maps. So I wanted to show you the big change that we got in the first 2 months. But this is probably right on the edge of stable. Usually you need to do about 40 sessions of neurofeedback, maybe 50 before you get to a more stable change. And this is less than that, probably halfway. You'll often see this, a pretty big shift of some resources. And as you can see, there's still some stuff to work on, and it's giving us the targets. This is why you often remap halfway through anyways, is to get a bit more clarity. So I've talked about attention in broad terms, control over executive function. I've talked about some of the inputs that are not pure attention, like speed of processing, working memory, which is the scratch pad, even some anxiety features like the cingulates, or some mood and anxiety features, mood and motivation features like the frontal lobes. These are all involved with executive function, as well as the 2 big areas we would think about in attention. And here we see visual systems and sensory systems as well. So attention is a lot of things. It's not just ADHD or attention problems or aging or brain fog. It's nuanced, and you can see how nuanced the information that comes back is. You can learn about your brain. You can take control. So I encourage you, if you're struggling with focus or stress in any way, look at your brain, understand how it works. If you were looking at your lipid panel and you see that the triglycerides are high, you might back off in the Ben & Jerry's. If you look at your alpha speed and it's really tanked, and you tend to stay up all night and eat sugar, well, making small changes to circadian rhythm management helps you pull back in behavior. You feel different. It shows up in the data. So you can learn to take control of your brain in lots of ways. That's really the message here. And if you watch this video because you're having trouble focusing, welcome to the club, but you can take change. You can take control of the changes your brain can make. And generally, we like to see this kind of change over a few months. But there's lots of ways to quickly make change, including medication and some supplements or nootropics. All right, some more questions here. Thanks, Ilya, for confirming phylogeny. Sonia, doctor, regarding the 20-25 sessions this person had, how long would each session on average and to get such a drastic change? Yeah, not just this person, but the other person I showed you has pretty much the same change, right? Let's see. Yeah, see, that's the same change, roughly, right? It's not quite as much behavioral or performance change, the IVA, but I would say that the brain maps have more change, actually. He just had a lot of change. He was a fast changer. It's also slow enough over a couple of months that I know it's more stable. This might have been 6 weeks, this person here. what did I say, 30 sessions? 25 sessions on this one. So 25 sessions. Was this an office person? I think it was. That would have been 2 months. 3 sessions a week for 2 months for half an hour per session. And maybe a bit longer. We tend to do 30 minutes of one thing, or 2 times 15 minutes of one thing, or 3 times 12 minutes of 3 things. Again, go back and watch the 1 versus 2 channel sequences segmenting video if you want to get a sense of how to build a process where you might go through foundational and then build on top of that with your protocols. That's a good one to look at in terms of how you might move through building out. But it's all about designing protocols based on our understanding of someone's goals, and then iterating to get this subjective experience of those goals. And then you go back and look at the brain maps a few months later to guide. So you guys probably can't tell, but I just did 18 minutes of neurofeedback, and I feel a tiny bit different. The world is more clear. Like, it's already 7 p.m. my time, and I could work. I could probably work a few hours. I won't, because it might throw off my circadian rhythm. I'll work an hour or 2. Gotta get that software out. Gotta hire another software developer to add to the team so I can get it out soon for you guys. The fitness tracker for the brain software. It's also sort of neurofeedback practice management software. So at the individual level, you can use it as a fitness tracker, but you should be able to do things like invite coaches in, and therapists and trainers and whomever else who can help you manage the process. And it becomes sort of hopefully a really nice place for you to like manage a lot of health and wellness, and then make it very accessible. So you don't have to like sit there and tell a provider who's brand new all of the things you do. You could just like share a single little dashboard page with them that summarizes all the stuff you decided to share all at once, and then control that access. And it's going to be HIPAA compliant as well. And if you're a therapist or a neurofeedbacker, we're building in SOAP note capacity as well. So, and client communication ability as well. So we should be able to do a lot by creating, right now I'm spending a lot of money at Peak Brain on different SaaS tools between scheduling and surveys and tracking data and processing data and reminders and all kinds of stuff. We're spending a lot of money in different SaaS tools. So I'm building this because it'll help me manage practices and groups of people, but it'll also help each of you hopefully track your healthy habits and see what's happening. So that'll be out in alpha before the end of the year. So I know the year's getting kind of long in the tooth, but we're kicking things in a high gear. So if you want to be in the alpha team, I will, probably not in this video, but by next week, I'll leave a link to collect an alpha list. And I'll probably hold it to something like 100 people or less, 100 people or fewer who are on the alpha group. And we'll give you a few months of access where you can track your stress and your sleep and your neurofeedback in your own little private training group, and give us feedback on it as well. So if you want to be an alpha tester, let me know. Jahan, could I describe what a person was like after a corpus callosotomy? Yeah, you can't tell. You cannot tell. It takes very specialized circumstances in testing to know somebody has a corpus callosum section, a callosotomy. You can do things like show them, flash pictures into one visual field or the other, and then under a table or under a box, have them identify which one it is by touch or name which one it is. And depending on which visual field you're flashing, you can only name it in one visual field, only to select the right item by touch in the other visual field, for instance. So there's some interesting things you can do. And there are some weird cases, unusual cases in the literature, and I've met a few. People that have a bit of alien hand syndrome where you end up with getting dressed and one hand buttons your shirt, the other hand's like, I don't want to wear this, and puts it down. Or one hand, left hand picks up a book to read it. The right hand's like, no, we're not reading that, and puts it down. Because the only one hemisphere, other way around, I guess, left hemisphere wants to read. The right's like, we don't read, and puts the book down. So you'll see stuff like that every so often in little weird quirky behavior, but you can't tell someone has a corpus callosotomy by talking to them, which is kind of cool. Because remember, you're not dividing the entire brain. The corpus callosum is not the connection between the left and right hemispheres. It's the connection between the left and right cortices. There's a lot of brain that is subcortical, and there's other commissures that cross midline. The anterior commissure, there's several. And the corpus callosum is only the biggest, basically, because the cortex is interconnected in homotopic sites like C3 minus C4, or C3 and C4. But that's just the surface of the brain. So you are getting there's some evidence you're getting some crosstalk of the brain at other levels. You also get non-dominant hemisphere language in many of these people. That's an interesting phenomenon you can test. Recognition of language in non-dominant hemispheres. You get some bilateral language, which can happen in normal or typical brains, or average brains roughly. I worked in a laterality lab and tested my language laterality and math laterality and a bunch of things, and realized I don't have a math area. I have 2 language areas instead on both sides. I'm kind of bilateral language, which makes some sense. I'm left-handed and ADHD and a bunch of other stuff that's not completely typical. So it makes sense that the pattern got a little bit misapplied, but you don't necessarily see anything obvious in most. 80-90% of people with collosotomies don't show any obvious behavior. Also, complete collosotomies aren't really done very much these days. So you're still having surgeries done in, I think, in Italy. But now when you have a seizure disorder that requires resection of the corpus callosum, we've learned enough about it to not have to do the whole thing. And so now we'll do just a few fibers at the genu or the knee, the genuflect, or the knee where it bends, or the middle, the rostrum, the front. Further back, you'll kind of figure out where the seizure is cortically now by measuring, and then realize, oh, it's transmitting on these fibers or these fibers or these fibers. It's not a homologous group. It's a chunk of tissue that has a lot of different layers through it that cross and have different fiber thicknesses and fiber densities that go different places throughout the brain. So it's got very different, the corpus callosum itself, maybe I should do a talk on the corpus callosum for you guys. But it's got several different pieces to it that have different functional significance, that act differently, and that carry different information. And so now if you need that kind of surgery for epilepsy or seizure disorder, they'll just cut the fibers in the one section, which is often the genu for some reason. But I believe, I could be wrong. But it's not the same surgery anymore. So you no longer have the complete dissection or resection of the corpus callosum, which means the cortices are much less permanently disconnected or thoroughly disconnected as they would be in the early cases, the early surgeries. This is part of why I traveled all around the US, driving around measuring brains in these 70 and 80-year-old people, is because they were the subjects, they were the patients for whom these surgeries were first developed 40 years, 50 years earlier, maybe older. And so they were getting close to the end of their lives. And we were doing this lateralized attention testing, brain mapping, that kind of stuff with them, trying to get a better sense of how their attention systems worked, especially 50 years after a surgery. So really interesting stuff. And I met some really cool people, but you can't really tell too much that they're different unless you do very specialized testing. So, yeah. Radar Ashwood, when you say 25 sessions, do you mean hitting the same protocols for 25 sessions? I do not. What I will say is, for someone like this, you might have one protocol, which is like a C3 minus C4. You might have one protocol, which is an FZ minus PZ mixed with maybe a C4 minus A2. You might do a T5 minus T6 mixed with a C3. You might do eyes closed PZ training with a stronger theta inhibit. There's a bunch of different things. You have to evaluate each one based on how it lands. Frontal asymmetry training might make sense for this person if their mood was off, because there's some odd alpha and theta in the front. I forget the exact case as it presented. So when, this person will have had, let's say 4, maybe 5 different protocols that are themselves combinations of 1 or 2 or 3 segments of training. And for each of those protocols, they're developed out based on, first, the goals in the brain that presents, second, the person's experience. We'll tune the segments, the frequencies, the sites. As you develop them, you can test them, so to speak, and get results or get responses. And as that happens, we end up with subjective shifts that tell us we're in the ballpark or that we're far away. And that helps us like design the protocols for the person. And so as you go through this, a segment might be in a triple or a two-parter or a dual in one protocol, and it also might be in a different protocol as a sequence. And so what you do is you take these individual subsegments and you layer them through like you're doing personal training. And then you sort of watch the effects you're getting and you refine your perspective on the person. And you kind of, in the 25 sessions, you might do half of them might have one particular segment that's running throughout them and, you know, not in the other half of them. But it's not quite as linear as like sticking with one thing the whole time or changing it up each time. It's a lot more blended as you iterate through different goals, experiences, etc. You know, so it's pretty complex actually. It's a bit of an art, which hopefully my new software will help you guys do yourself and come up with a little more elegant control over. Well, great questions, guys. I actually had a fairly long set of Q&A tonight. I appreciate all your attention, all your questions. Hey, I'm getting really close to 1,500, a modest 1,500 subscribers to the channel. If you're not already subscribed, do me a favor and subscribe. We're like 10 away. You can kick me over that level, and I'll be happy. You know, modest gains. But also, like, we're still, you know, don't have much of a reach. So if you find this stuff interesting, please like a video, please subscribe, please comment on one or two. Share, share this video out to your friends and family. Share it out to social. Share it to your grandmother. Share it to your kids. You know, I keep it PG mostly. So if you have questions on this stuff, if you want to learn more about neurofeedback, I did give you a free consult link in the show notes. But feel free to leave comments on the video now or later. I do come back and answer most questions. And let me know if you want to talk about neurofeedback or biohacking or other goals for brain health and performance. I am generally always up for a conversation. And when you book a call with Peak Brain, most of the time you do talk to me with an intro call. Every week someone's surprised when I actually call them. But until we get a little bit bigger, if you book an intro call with Peak Brain, I'll still talk to you if I can. All right, guys. Well, you have a good evening. Thanks so much for your questions and your time. I really appreciate everyone who showed up. And I will talk to you in a week or so.